Yo, Dallas, we need to talk. 2 street legends. 1 tragic freeway shooting. And a courtroom bombshell that's been building since 2020. And it is finally about to blow up in 2026. MO3, Melvin Noble. The voice that had the whole DFW underground on lock. Gunned down in broad daylight on I-35E. Chased down on foot. Shot in front of traffic like something out of a movie. That was November 2020. The city was shook. The culture was shook. Now fast forward, Yella Beezy, the "That's on me" hitmaker, former friend turned co-defendant in the court of public opinion, sitting under house arrest with an ankle monitor, facing capital murder. Prosecutors say he didn't pull the trigger himself. They claim he paid for it. 40 stacks in cash, allegedly pulled right after the shooting. A hired gunman named Kewan Dontrell White. A second man, Devin Brown, also indicted. And here's the twist that's got hip-hop legal circles buzzing. Prosecutors want to use Yella Beezy's own lyrics as evidence against him in trial. Tracks like "Keep It in the Streets" and "On Ya Head" could be played for a jury. Beezy has pleaded not guilty. He denies it all. No verdict, no conviction, just allegations, a $750,000 bond, and a trial date now locked for August 24, 2026. Street rap made these 2 icons. Now the courtroom might decide the rest of the story. We'll be watching every single hearing. Dallas, Texas has always bred raw, unfiltered street rap, but few voices hit as hard or as fast as Melvin Noble, known to the world as MO3. He didn't come from a label machine or a viral gimmick. He built his following brick by brick out of Oak Cliff, turning pain, survival, and neighborhood loyalty into music that felt lived in rather than performed. His breakout moment came when he linked with fellow Dallas rapper Boozy Badass on the track "Everybody," a song that exploded online and introduced MO3's gravelly, emotionally charged delivery to an audience far beyond Texas. By the late 2010s, he wasn't just a local favorite. He was being talked about as one of the most promising voices to come out of the Dallas street rap scene in years. A storyteller whose bars carried the weight of real experience. Around that same era, another Dallas voice was climbing fast, Marquise Conway, known to fans as Yella Beezy. His single, "That's on Me," became a certified hit, cracking mainstream radio and earning him a major label deal, turning him from a local hustler-turned-rapper into one of the city's biggest breakout stars. For a stretch, Yella Beezy and MO3 weren't rivals. They were reportedly close, often mentioned in the same breath as 2 of Dallas's brightest rising talents, 2 men who had clawed their way from the same streets into the same spotlight. But that spotlight came with danger either of them could outrun. In October 2019, Yella Beezy survived a drive-by shooting in Dallas that left him hospitalized, an attack that sent shockwaves through the city's hip-hop community, and immediately sparked online speculation, rumor, and street chatter about who was behind it, and why. Then, just over a year later, tragedy struck again, this time fatally. On November 11, 2020, MO3 was driving on Interstate 35E in Dallas when a masked gunman reportedly stepped out of a vehicle in traffic, approached on foot, and opened fire. MO3 ran, trying to escape on a crowded freeway in broad daylight, but he was struck multiple times, including a fatal shot to the head. He was pronounced dead shortly after. The killing, carried out in full view of terrified drivers, sent immediate shockwaves through Dallas and the broader hip-hop world. A beloved young voice silenced in the most public, brutal way imaginable. For years, the case sat in a painful limbo. Investigators worked to piece together who was responsible, while fans and the city mourned an artist whose career had been cut short right as it was reaching new heights. Then, in March 2025, that limbo broke wide open. A Dallas County grand jury indicted Yella Beezy on capital murder charges, alleging that he had orchestrated MO3's killing by paying someone else to carry it out. Just days later, he was taken into custody. Prosecutors allege that Yella Beezy hired a man named Kewan Dontrell White to be the shooter, and that financial records show he withdrew a large sum of cash, reportedly around $40,000, in the days surrounding the shooting. A second man, Devin Maurice Brown, was also indicted in connection with the case. Yella Beezy was granted bond, ultimately reduced from $2 million down to $750,000, and released under strict conditions, including house arrest and electronic ankle monitoring. Through his legal team, he has firmly denied any involvement and entered a not guilty plea, insisting the accusations do not reflect the truth of what happened that day on I-35. What had once been, by many accounts, a friendship between two rising Dallas stars was now the center of one of the most closely watched capital murder cases in recent hip-hop history, one that would only grow more explosive as prosecutors began preparing evidence for trial, including material pulled directly from Yella Beezy's own catalog of music. As the case against Yella Beezy moved deeper into the court system, one detail stood out above all the rest and immediately became the story's most talked about twist. Prosecutors announced they wanted to use his own music as evidence against him. According to court filings, the state planned to introduce 4 of his recorded tracks, including songs titled "Keep It in the Streets," "On Ya Head, Take 3," and "Gassed Up," arguing that the lyrics in these songs connected directly to the tension and alleged feud that prosecutors say ultimately led to MO3's death. For a genre that has weathered decades of debate over whether song lyrics should ever be treated as literal confessions rather than artistic expression, this development reignited a familiar and heated conversation across the hip-hop world. Defense attorneys pushed back hard, filing a motion asking the court to exclude the lyrics entirely, arguing that using an artist's creative writing as courtroom evidence risked criminalizing storytelling itself and unfairly biasing a jury before a single witness ever took the stand. The presiding judge did not rule immediately, instead stating she would review the material further before deciding what the jury would ultimately be allowed to hear. While the lyrics dispute unfolded, the broader case kept grinding forward through a series of pretrial hearings, each one drawing renewed media attention and reigniting online debate about Yella Beezy's guilt or innocence. Prosecutors continued laying out their theory that he had paid for the killing, pointing to alleged financial withdrawals and communications they say tie him to the plot, while his legal team continued to insist he had nothing to do with his former friend's death. Throughout this period, Yella Beezy remained free on bond but under strict house arrest, required to wear an ankle monitor at all times. At one point, his attorneys requested a limited work release, arguing that the restrictive conditions were damaging his ability to maintain his music career and provide for his family, noting that he had shown no violations since being released. The court did not immediately grant that request, leaving him confined as the calendar pushed closer to trial. The case then took an unexpected and deeply personal turn in early 2026. Yella Beezy was scheduled to appear for a pivotal pretrial hearing on January 16, one of the final steps before his trial was set to begin, but he did not show up in court. Shortly afterward, it was revealed that his absence followed the death of his mother, a loss he addressed publicly and emotionally on social media, writing about the grief of losing the person who had been by his side since birth. The moment offered a rare glimpse of vulnerability in a case that had largely been defined by legal maneuvering and public speculation, and it forced the court to adjust its schedule, pushing the highly anticipated February 2 trial date further down the calendar. By the following month, court records confirmed that Yella Beezy's capital murder trial had been formally reset for August 24, 2026, with additional pretrial hearings scheduled in the weeks leading up to it. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison, given that Texas prosecutors in this case were not pursuing the death penalty option in later filings, though earlier reporting had noted capital murder charges in Texas can carry that possibility depending on how a case proceeds. Meanwhile, the man prosecutors allege was the hired shooter, Keywan Dontrell White, remains a central figure in the case, having previously been sentenced to roughly 9 years in federal prison, though that sentence stemmed from an unrelated weapons charge rather than any conviction tied directly to MO3's death. Co-defendant Devin Brown's case has also continued to move through the system, with legal observers noting that its outcome could influence the evidence and strategy in Yella Beezy's own trial. As the August court date approaches, the city of Dallas finds itself once again bracing for a moment that blends grief, music, and the justice system in a way few cases ever have. The story of two artists who once stood side by side in the same rap scene, now permanently linked by a courtroom neither of them could have imagined facing. As Yella Beezy's case moved deeper into the pretrial process, the legal battle took a turn that pulled the entire hip-hop community into the courtroom conversation. Prosecutors announced their intention to introduce Yella Beezy's own music as evidence, specifically pointing to tracks including "Keep It in the Streets," "On Your Head, Take 3," and "Gassed Up." The state's argument was that the lyrics in these songs connected directly to the tension, an alleged feud that prosecutors say ultimately led to MO3's death. For his defense team, this move represented something far more dangerous than a simple evidentiary dispute. It raised the broader question of whether an artist's creative expression should ever be treated as a confession in a court of law. Defense attorneys filed a motion in limine, formally asking the court to block the state from playing these songs in front of a jury, arguing that fictionalized or stylized lyrics common throughout the genre should not be conflated with literal admissions of guilt. Presiding Judge Chika Nim did not immediately rule on the request, instead stating she would review the defense's exhibits and the prosecution's response before making a final decision, leaving one of the most consequential pretrial questions in the case still unresolved heading toward trial. Alongside the lyrics dispute, the defense also filed what's known as an omnibus pretrial motion, a broad formal request compelling the state to hand over materials the defense is legally entitled to review ahead of trial, including witness lists, physical evidence, laboratory results, and any additional information that could support Yella Beezy's case. Legal observers have noted that these procedural battles, while less dramatic than the headlines suggest, often shape the entire direction of a capital case long before a jury is ever seated. Meanwhile, Yella Beezy's legal team, led by attorney John F. Guscio III, also pushed for adjustments to his bond conditions, requesting limited work release so he could continue supporting himself and his music career while the case remained pending. In their filing, his attorneys argued that his compliance with the strict terms of his release, combined with continued ankle monitoring, meant the community's safety remained protected even with expanded movement allowances. The court did not immediately grant that request, and Yella Beezy remained under house arrest as hearings continued. The case, originally scheduled for trial on February 2, 2026, was delayed after Yella Beezy experienced a devastating personal loss. He missed a pretrial hearing in January following the death of his mother, a loss he addressed publicly and emotionally on social media, describing the disorientation of losing the person who had been by his side, in his words, since birth. Courts typically allow for such delays in capital cases, and this proved no exception. Following the postponement, Dallas County Criminal District Court No. 3 set a new trial date, moving the proceedings to August 24, 2026, with additional pretrial hearings scheduled for late July and late August to finalize outstanding motions, including the still undecided ruling on the lyrics evidence. Throughout all of this, Yella Beezy has continued to maintain his innocence, and it remains critical to note that no verdict has been reached and no conviction has occurred. He remains legally presumed innocent unless and until a jury determines otherwise. Meanwhile, Kiwandantra White, the man prosecutors allege was hired as the actual shooter, has been serving a separate federal prison sentence tied to an unrelated firearms charge, a detail that has added further complexity to how the case may unfold at trial. As August 2026 approaches, Dallas is bracing for a trial that promises to be one of the most closely watched in the city's hip-hop history, a case that could ultimately determine not just one man's fate, but also test how far prosecutors can go in treating rap lyrics as courtroom evidence. The Rise and Legal Storm of MO3 and Yella Beezy, Chapter 4. By July 2026, with the trial just weeks away, the courtroom drama surrounding Yella Beezy took its most detailed and revealing turn yet. Over a multi-day pre-trial hearing, prosecutors called Dallas Police Detective Eric Barnes, the lead investigator on the MO3 homicide, to lay out for the judge exactly why they believe rap lyrics, social media posts, and live-streamed videos should be allowed in front of a jury. Barnes was careful to note that no investigation he conducts begins with rap music itself, explaining that detectives instead cross-reference lyrics against witness statements, surveillance footage, court-authorized wiretaps, and other physical evidence before drawing any conclusions. Still, his testimony laid out what prosecutors describe as a slow-building, years-long rivalry between the two Dallas artists, one that allegedly played out not just in the streets but across Instagram live sessions, public interviews, and diss-style verses. According to Barnes, the origins of the alleged feud trace back to 2017, when a Dallas comedian named Royly Pate publicly questioned whether Yella Beezy was actually from Dallas, a comment that reportedly set off a chain reaction. Pate, described as a friend of MO3, was allegedly assaulted afterward by Conway and members of his entourage. More than a year later, Pate was shot and ultimately died from complications related to that shooting, an event prosecutors have woven into their broader narrative of escalating tension between the two camps. Detective Barnes testified that throughout this period, Yella Beezy allegedly referenced placing a bounty on MO3 within his own music, a claim prosecutors argue supports their theory that the killing was not random, but the result of long-simmering animosity finally boiling over. Barnes also addressed why investigators lean so heavily on public content rather than traditional interrogation. He told the court that many people connected to the case were unwilling to cooperate directly with law enforcement, forcing detectives to turn to platforms like YouTube and social media to piece together a timeline, since much of what might have otherwise stayed private had instead been broadcast publicly and, in his words, monetized through music and content. The defense pushed back forcefully throughout the hearing, with legal experts testifying that rap as a genre routinely relies on exaggeration, fictionalized personas, and storytelling techniques that should never be mistaken for literal confessions, warning that jurors unfamiliar with the genre's conventions could easily misread creative writing as autobiography. The presiding judge did not issue an immediate ruling on whether the lyrics and related content would be admissible, instead choosing to reconvene both legal teams for additional arguments before making a final decision ahead of the trial. With jury selection now approaching on August 24, 2026, this ruling stands as one of the last major legal hurdles before the case reaches its most consequential phase. Yella Beezy continues to maintain his innocence, and remains presumed innocent under the law, even as the pretrial hearings have exposed an increasingly detailed and public portrait of the alleged rivalry prosecutors say ended in MO3's death. As the trial date nears, Dallas, and the wider hip-hop community, remains fixed on a case poised to test not only one man's fate, but the limits of using an artist's own words against him in a court of law. Yo, listen, this story is far from over. August 24, 2026 is circled in red on every calendar in Dallas hip-hop right now, because that's when Yella Beezy walks into that courtroom for real. Jury selection. Opening statements. The whole thing. And whether his own lyrics get played in front of 12 strangers deciding his fate? That ruling could drop any day now. So here's what you gotta do, hit that subscribe button right now, because we are not missing a single hearing, a single filing, a single update on this case. This is one of the biggest legal sagas hip-hop has seen in years, and you deserve to hear it straight, no cap, no clickbait, just what's actually happening in that courtroom. Drop a comment below. Where were you when you first heard MO3's name? What do you think a jury's gonna do when they hear those tracks played back in a courtroom? And real talk, do you think lyrics should ever be used as evidence? Let's get that conversation going. Hit that like button if you want us covering this trial gavel to gavel, and turn on notifications, because when that verdict comes down, whichever way it goes, you are going to hear it from us first. MO3's story deserves the truth. Yella Beezy deserves due process. And y'all deserve real reporting, not rumors. We'll see you at the next update. Stay tuned, Dallas. This one's not over.